The diesel world just watched one of its biggest names get dragged out in handcuffs. Heavy D. Sparks, the bearded giant who built an empire modifying trucks and entertaining millions, made a choice that left everyone stunned. Federal marshals showed up at his door, and instead of writing a check for nearly $1 million, he let them take him to jail. 3 days behind bars for what his lawyer calls a paperwork dispute. But the story runs way deeper than that. October 7, 2025 started like any other day in Salt Lake City, until federal marshals knocked on Heavy D's door. Dave Sparks, known to millions as Heavy D from Diesel Brothers, was arrested and booked into Salt Lake County Jail. The charge wasn't what most people expected. He wasn't accused of building illegal trucks or breaking new laws. The judge found him in contempt of court for refusing to pay $843,602 in fees stemming from a years-old lawsuit about Clean Air Act violations. The arrest came after a federal judge issued a bench warrant on October 2nd, declaring that Sparks had repeatedly and willfully ignored court orders. This wasn't his first warning either. He'd been found in contempt back in June 2024. Then again in August 2025 for transferring property when he wasn't supposed to. Each time, he chose defiance over compliance. For 3 days, the man who'd built custom diesel monsters and entertained millions sat in a cell, becoming a symbol for something much bigger than truck modifications. His arrest sent shockwaves through the automotive community. Social media exploded with supporters calling him a hero, standing up against government overreach, while critics labeled him a wealthy influencer, dodging responsibility. But here's what most people didn't understand at first. Heavy D wasn't running from criminal charges or hiding from the government. According to his lawyer, Cole Cannon, this was about attorney fees from a civil lawsuit, not fines paid directly to federal agencies. That distinction would become critical as the story unfolded. But first, you need to understand how a kid from Utah who loved trucks ended up in federal custody. Before the arrest, before the lawsuits, Heavy D was living the dream millions of gearheads fantasize about. Born Dave Sparks in Utah to a military family, he grew up obsessed with anything that had an engine. His father passed away when he was just 21. But that tragedy didn't slow him down. He studied welding and fabrication at Weber State University before dropping out after 1 semester, deciding real-world experience beat classroom theory. He started working construction for his uncle, operating heavy machinery and learning the business from the ground up. That's when he hired his childhood friend David Kiley, better known as Diesel Dave, and together they launched Diesel Sellers. The concept was simple, but brilliant. Buy diesel trucks headed for the scrapyard, completely transform them into fire-breathing monsters, and sell them to enthusiasts who wanted something no dealership could offer. Their YouTube videos caught fire, racking up millions of views of crazy builds and even crazier stunts. Jay Leno noticed, brought them on The Tonight Show, and Discovery Channel came calling shortly after. Diesel Brothers premiered in 2016 and ran for 8 seasons, making Heavy D a household name in automotive circles. His personal YouTube channel exploded to 4.5 million subscribers, with nearly 1 billion total views. Instagram added another 3.8 million followers watching his daily adventures. The money followed the fame. Diesel Sellers and Sparks Motors became multi-million-dollar operations, with custom builds sometimes topping $100,000. His net worth climbed to an estimated $8 to $11 million. He bought property, invested in real estate, even acquired the rights to the Nikola Badger electric truck project. But the same modifications that built his empire were about to become his biggest nightmare. In 2017, while Heavy D was riding high on television success, a group called Utah Physicians for a Healthy Environment decided they'd seen enough. These weren't government bureaucrats or faceless regulators. They were doctors who'd watched Diesel Brothers showcase trucks spewing massive black clouds of exhaust, a practice known as rolling coal, and they believed it was poisoning their communities. The physicians filed a federal lawsuit against Heavy D, Diesel Dave, and their associated companies, accusing them of systematically violating the Clean Air Act. The allegations were serious and specific. They claimed the Diesel brothers were removing or disabling pollution control equipment from diesel trucks, then selling those modified vehicles and the parts to do it yourself. Each truck they touched allegedly produced over 30 times more toxic emissions than a factory diesel with its emissions equipment intact. Dr. Howie Garber, a board member of the group, didn't mince words when explaining their position. He stated that pollution controls on diesel vehicles are mandated by federal law and necessary to prevent acute and chronic diseases caused by air pollution. According to the physicians, Diesel brothers were turning trucks into disease-generating machines, and they had the data to prove it represented a 3,000% increase in harmful emissions. The lawsuit wasn't seeking money for themselves. They emphasized repeatedly that any penalties would go to the federal treasury, not their organization. This was about enforcement of environmental law and public health, not a cash grab. But Heavy D and his team saw it differently. They argued these were show trucks, limited mileage vehicles built for display and off-road use. The stage was set for a legal battle that would drag on for years, with consequences nobody fully anticipated. When the lawsuit first landed, Heavy D thought the claims were absurd. Then he saw the number the physicians were seeking, and his jaw hit the floor. $114 million. For a guy who'd built maybe 20 trucks with emissions modifications that worked out to roughly $5 million per vehicle. He couldn't wrap his head around how anyone justified that math. His legal team fought back hard, arguing the lawsuit was wildly overreaching. These weren't thousands of trucks polluting highways across America. Most were show vehicles, off-road builds, or limited-use customs that barely saw public roads. But the federal court wasn't buying their defense. In 2020, Judge Robert Shelby ruled that Heavy D and his co-defendants had violated the Clean Air Act over 400 times. The court issued a permanent injunction, banning them from any future emissions modifications, and levied roughly $850,000 in fines and fees. Heavy D appealed, and here's where things get interesting. The appellate court actually sided with him on a major point. They determined he could only be held liable for violations within Utah state lines, not across the entire country like the original judgment suggested. That gutted the massive $114 million down to about 1% of the original demand. Victory, right? Not exactly. While the damages got slashed, the attorney fees didn't shrink with them. In fact, they went up. The appellate court labeled the Utah physicians for a healthy environment as the prevailing party, which meant Heavy D was on the hook for their legal costs. And according to him, that billing clock never stopped running. The fees kept climbing, eventually reaching that $843,602 figure that would lead marshals to his door years later. After spending 3 days in jail, Heavy D wasn't backing down. He hit Instagram and YouTube hard, releasing videos where he laid out his version of events with the raw emotion of someone who felt wronged by the system. In his posts, he claimed vindication despite sitting in a cell, arguing he'd actually won the important parts of his appeal but was still being treated like a criminal. His main argument centered on what he called the real injustice. He'd successfully reduced the actual damages to almost nothing in appeals court, proving his liability was limited to those specific Utah trucks. But the lawyer fees kept ballooning, seemingly without end or oversight. He accused the environmental attorneys of turning the case into a money-making operation, dragging it out over years while billing hours that eventually dwarfed the original violations. One of his co-defendants in the lawsuit, Keaton the Muscle Hoskins, went even harder on social media. Hoskins posted a lengthy statement on Facebook defending Heavy D's decision to fight rather than fold. He admitted that he himself had chosen to settle and buy his way out of the lawsuit because fighting the government felt impossible. But he had nothing but admiration for Heavy D's refusal to do the same, calling the entire case unfair from the start. Hoskins claimed the physicians saw nothing but dollar signs when Diesel Brothers became a hit TV show, turning environmental concerns into what he called a cash grab. He went on to bash the EPA equipment itself, calling it garbage with no real environmental value. His post struck a chord with thousands of diesel enthusiasts who felt the regulations were government overreach. But critics pointed out that federal law isn't optional just because you disagree with it. On October 9th, just 3 days after his arrest, Heavy D walked into a courtroom for his contempt hearing. What happened next surprised almost everyone following the case. The judge ordered his immediate release from federal custody, but it came with conditions. Heavy D and his legal team had agreed to provide certain information to the Utah physicians for a healthy environment within 10 days of the hearing. His attorney, Cole Cannon, wasted no time spinning the narrative. He told reporters and posted videos claiming Heavy D was arrested not for any crime, but for what he characterized as a paperwork dispute. The distinction might seem minor to outsiders, but legally it's massive. This was civil contempt, not criminal prosecution. The court wasn't trying to punish Heavy D for past wrongdoing. They were trying to force him to comply with orders he'd been ignoring. Civil contempt works differently than criminal charges. The person being held has the keys to their own cell, so to speak. Pay the money, provide the documents, follow the court order, and you walk free. It's coercive, not punitive. The moment Heavy D agreed to turn over the required information, the judge had no reason to keep him locked up. But calling it just a paperwork dispute ignores the bigger picture. Heavy D had been ordered multiple times to pay nearly $850,000 and provide financial documentation. He'd transferred property in apparent violation of court orders. These weren't clerical errors or missed deadlines. The judge specifically noted his violations were repeated and willful, which is why the arrest warrant got issued in the first place. Still, Heavy D emerged claiming victory, his supporters rallying around him as someone who'd stood up to what they saw as an unjust system. Most people facing nearly $1 million in legal fees and fresh out of jail might lay low for a while. Not Heavy D. Within days of his release, he was back on social media promoting his next big venture, proving the legal troubles hadn't slowed down his business ambitions even slightly. His latest project involves something unexpected for a diesel guy. EMBR Motors, a company he formed with business partner Cole Cannon, acquired the intellectual property rights to 3 vehicles from the troubled Nikola Corporation. The crown jewel is the Nikola Badger, an electric and hydrogen fuel cell pickup truck that Nikola abandoned back in 2020 after the company's founder got convicted of fraud. Heavy D purchased the rights and announced plans to actually bring the Badger to market, along with an electric UTV and electric watercraft. The irony isn't lost on anyone. The man who built his empire on diesel smoke and environmental violations now wants to sell electric vehicles. But Heavy D sees it differently, talking about redefining diesel as a sustainable power source and exploring hybrid technology that combines the best of both worlds. He's even appeared in Ram truck commercials alongside the company's CEO, promoting the return of the Hemi-Five 8 engine. His businesses continue printing money despite the legal drama. Diesel Sellers and Sparks Motors handle custom builds that can exceed $100,000 each, with waiting lists stretching months. His merchandise line generates over $1 million annually through diesel power gear. YouTube ad revenue, sponsorships, and brand partnerships add hundreds of thousands more. Industry estimates put his current net worth between $8 and $11 million, though the legal fees are taking their bite. Heavy D might have walked out of jail, but his legal nightmare is far from over. The agreement he made to provide information buys him temporary relief, but the core issue remains unresolved. He still owes $843,602 unless he can negotiate a settlement or find another legal avenue. If he fails to comply with the new agreement or continues dodging payment, he could find himself right back in federal custody. His case isn't happening in isolation either. The diesel modification world has been watching similar prosecutions play out across the country. Tony Lake, a Wyoming diesel mechanic and entrepreneur, got hit even harder. He pleaded guilty to conspiring to violate the Clean Air Act and served over a year in federal prison, plus paid more than $50,000 in fines. His family has been begging the Trump administration for a pardon, even gaining support from Senator Cynthia Lummis, who called him a political target. These cases represent a broader crackdown on emissions tampering that's been building for years. Federal and state authorities aren't backing down, and the penalties keep getting steeper. But here's what makes Heavy D's situation unique. Most people charged with these violations don't have 4.5 million YouTube subscribers and massive social media influence. His videos and TV show didn't just modify trucks, they inspired countless others to do the same, spreading the coal rolling culture nationwide. That influence cuts both ways. It made him wealthy and famous, but it also painted a target on his back. When prosecutors and environmental groups look for test cases to send a message, they go after the biggest names. Heavy D became the poster boy for emissions violations, whether he wanted that role or not. So where does this leave Heavy D Sparks and the empire he built on diesel smoke and American defiance? Standing at a crossroads where every direction looks complicated. He's got 10 days to provide the information he agreed to hand over. And then the real negotiations about that $843,602 probably begin. His lawyer insists it's all about attorney fees and government overreach, while environmental groups say it's about enforcing laws that protect public health. The truth probably lives somewhere in the middle, messy and complicated like most legal battles that drag on for years. Heavy D violated federal emissions laws hundreds of times on television for millions to see. That's not really in dispute. Whether the penalties fit the crime and whether the lawyer fees became excessive, that's where reasonable people disagree. What's undeniable is that he chose 3 days in jail over writing a check, turning himself into a symbol for diesel enthusiasts who feel targeted by regulations they see as government overreach. His story raises bigger questions the diesel community keeps wrestling with. Where's the line between reasonable environmental protection and excessive punishment? Should someone face nearly $1 million in fees for modifying 20 trucks, even if those modifications inspired thousands of others? Can you really separate Heavy D's personal liability from his massive influence? Whatever happens next, Heavy D isn't going quietly. He's still building trucks, still posting videos, still growing his businesses, and still fighting the system he believes wronged him. For his millions of followers, he's proof you can stand your ground even when the government comes knocking. For his critics, he's a cautionary tale about the cost of ignoring federal law. The diesel world is watching, waiting to see if Heavy D's gamble pays off or if those marshals come back.